The city of San Francisco unfolded beneath David Chen's 40th floor penthouse like a circuit board of pulsating light. From this vantage point, the world was an abstraction, a silent, glittering map of his success. The distant headlights of cars moving across the Bay Bridge were like data packets streaming towards their destination. The fog rolling in from the Pacific was a soft focus filter, blurring the hard edges of the metropolis he had conquered. At 32, David was the master of this universe. His company, Nexus AI, was a titan in the tech world, a behemoth valued at over $200 million, with gleaming offices in Silicon Valley, London, and Tokyo. His name was whispered, with a mixture of awe and envy in boardrooms and at tech conferences. He was the wunderkind who had clawed his way up from nothing, a ghost in the machine who had rewritten his own code. Yet, in the sterile perfection of his minimalist apartment, a cavern of polished concrete, glass, and matte black steel, a different kind of ghost haunted him. Her name was Kesha. 5 years in the hyper-accelerated timeline of the tech industry. 5 years was an eternity. It was the time it took for startups to become unicorns and for titans to become relics. For David, those 5 years had been a relentless grind, a blur of 16-hour workdays, venture capital meetings, product launches, and brutal competition. He had fueled himself with ramen noodles, cheap coffee, and the raw, desperate hunger. To prove everyone wrong, he had built his empire brick by digital brick. But through it all, Kesha's absence was a corrupted line of code in his own operating system, a bug he could never patch. She had disappeared without a trace. One day she was there, her laughter filling his tiny, cramped apartment, her belief in him a bulwark against his own doubts. The next, she was gone. Her number was disconnected. Her social media profiles were deleted. She had moved out of their shared life without a word, leaving a void that all the money and success in the world could not fill. He had told himself it was the pressure, the poverty, the uncertainty of his future that had driven her away. Had buried the pain under layers of work, transmuting his heartbreak into ambition. But the question why remained, a persistent, unanswered query running in the background of his life. Tonight, the ghost became flesh. He was driving his Mercedes G-Wagon through a part of the city he rarely visited, a neighborhood of laundromats, family-run bakeries, and worn-down apartment buildings. It was a detour, a traffic diversion from an accident on the freeway, but it felt like a journey back in time, back to a life he had fought so hard to escape. And then he saw her. The world didn't just stop, it fractured. Across the street, sitting at a battered bus stop with a peeling paint job and a graffiti-scarred bench, was Kesha. Time had etched new lines of worry around her eyes and mouth. She looked thinner, worn down by a life that was clearly a world away from the one they had dreamed of together. But it wasn't her that delivered the soul-shattering blow. It was the 3 small boys playing at her feet. 3 boys, all of them, by the look of them, around 5 years old, and all of them had his face. David's breath hitched. The roar of the city traffic faded into a dull, distant hum. His hands, usually so steady whether typing code or signing multi-million-dollar contracts, felt numb on the steering wheel. He saw his own unmistakable green eyes, a rarity that had been his grandfather's legacy, staring back at him from 3 small, identical faces. He saw his own light brown hair, unruly and prone to sticking up at the crown. He saw the way one of them tilted his head when he listened, a perfect mirror of a gesture he made 100 times a day in meetings. He saw another gesture with his hands while talking animatedly, a miniature replica of his own impassioned arguments with his engineers. Impossible, he whispered, the word a dry rasp in his throat, without a conscious thought. He swerved the car, pulling into a red bus zone, his $200,000 vehicle abandoned in the middle of the street like a piece of junk. A chorus of angry horns erupted behind him, but he didn't hear them. His entire consciousness had narrowed to the impossible scene across the street. 5 years. The math was brutal, simple, and undeniable. She had been pregnant when she left, pregnant with his children, triplets. He watched paralyzed, as Kesha counted a small pile of coins in her palm, her brow furrowed in concentration. One of the boys, noticing her distress, held up his own small hand, offering a few crumpled dollar bills. The image was a physical blow. It struck David with the force of a battering ram, shattering the glass walls of his carefully constructed life, while he was closing deals that netted him millions, dining at Michelin-starred restaurants, and debating the merits of adding another luxury sports car to his collection. His children, his own flesh and blood, were counting pennies for a bus fare. The injustice of it was a searing, white-hot agony that ripped through his chest. He stumbled out of the car, the world tilting on its axis. He crossed the street in a trance, a blaring taxi horn barely registering as he walked directly into its path. The driver slammed on the brakes, shouting a string of curses that David didn't hear. His universe now consisted only of the woman and the 3 boys who were a living, breathing echo of his own past. Kesha looked up, her eyes widening in shock and terror. Her face, already pale with fatigue, lost the last of its color. It was the look of someone seeing a ghost. Instinctively, she reached out, pulling the 3 boys closer to her, her body forming a protective shield around them. She was a lioness, and he was the threat. Kesha, his voice was a wreck, a hoarse croak laden with the weight of 5 years of unanswered questions, of a grief he had never allowed himself to fully process. David, she stammered, her composure shattering. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with her phone, shoving it into a worn, cracked purse that looked like it had seen better days. Her eyes darted around, as if expecting danger from every direction. "These are my children," he said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, of a truth so profound, so earth-shattering, that it defied denial. The resemblance was too perfect, too absolute. He looked closer and saw that one of the boys had a tiny, faint scar on his chin, in the exact same spot where David had a scar from falling off his bike when he was 6 years old. It was a genetic ghost, an echo across time. One of the boys, the one with the look of intense curiosity that David recognized as his own, took a hesitant step forward. "Mummy, who's that man?" The voice was soft, polite, yet it carried a strange, unnerving maturity for a 5-year-old. It was his own voice, pitched higher, purer. The sound of it, the simple, innocent question, was like a punch to the gut. David felt the air leave his lungs. He had missed everything. Their first words, their first steps, the sound of their laughter, the feeling of holding them in his arms. He had been robbed of 5 years of fatherhood. "They're 5, aren't they?" David pressed, his voice gaining a hard, desperate edge. He was doing the math, the dates searing themselves into his brain. "You were pregnant when you disappeared, when you cut me out of your life without a single word of explanation." Kesha closed her eyes for a brief, painful moment. It was a silent battle, a struggle between a long-held secret and a truth that had finally, violently, come to light. When she opened them, her expression was a raw, tangled mess of pain, guilt, and a fear that seemed to go beyond just him. "David, this is not the time, this isn't the place for this conversation. 5 years. Kesha, his voice rose, sharp with anguish and betrayal, causing a few pedestrians to turn and stare. He didn't care. 5 years of my children's lives you hid from me. 5 years I can never get back." One of the boys, the quietest of the 3, flinched at his raised voice and hid behind his mother's legs, his small face etched with fear. Sight of it sent a fresh wave of agony through David. He was scaring his own son. He forced himself to lower his voice, but the anger still burned like acid in his throat. "Why? Why would you do this to me?" "To us." Kesha stood up abruptly, her movements jerky and panicked. She grabbed the boy's hands, her grip tight. "You don't understand the situation. I tried to tell you. I tried to talk to you. But what? He interrupted, his patience gone. "You ran away like a coward. You blocked me. You deleted your life. You pretended we never existed. You let me believe you just stopped loving me." The low rumble of an approaching bus grew louder. Kesha began to herd the children towards the curb, her desperation palpable. "Mom, do we have enough money for all of us?" one of the boys asked, his small voice filled with genuine anxiety as he held up his crumpled dollar bills. Those words broke David. The sheer, brutal reality of his children worrying about a $2 bus fare while he lived a life of unimaginable wealth was a condemnation. It was a verdict on the man he had become. "Kesha, wait," he said, reaching for her arm. She recoiled as if he had burned her. "I couldn't raise 3 kids on my own and work and give you the kind of attention you always demanded," she whispered, her words coming in a frantic rush. She glanced around nervously, her eyes wide with a fear that wasn't directed at him. "Some people they didn't want you to know. People who had a lot to lose if you ever found out." "What people? What the hell are you talking about?" But it was too late. The bus had arrived, its hydraulic doors hissing open like the jaws of some great beast, ready to swallow his family whole. Kesha pushed the children inside with an urgency that seemed to go far beyond simply catching a ride. "I can't talk about it here," she said, her voice a desperate whisper from the steps of the bus. "It's not safe." The doors hissed shut, a final, definitive barrier between them. Through the grimy glass, he saw the faces of his 3 sons looking back at him, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and confusion. He stood on the sidewalk, a statue of impotence, as the bus pulled away. taking his past, his present, and his future with it. Some people didn't want him to know, people who had a lot to lose. The words echoed in his mind, a sinister, looping refrain. Her fear hadn't been of him, or at least, not entirely. She was afraid of someone else. Someone with the power to make her disappear and stay hidden for 5 long years. He walked back to his Mercedes, the blaring horns and angry shouts of other drivers now just white noise. For the first time since the early days of his startup, when he was on the brink of bankruptcy, David Chen, the tech mogul, the visionary, the self-made millionaire, felt completely and utterly lost. But as he slid behind the wheel, the raw agony began to cool, hardening into something else. It was a cold, clear, and absolute determination. He had survived poverty. He had overcome the subtle, smiling racism of investors who had called him a risk. He had built an empire from scratch against all odds. Uncovering the truth of what had been done to him would be child's play in comparison. He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. He wasn't just a CEO, he was a master of information. His first call was to his head of cybersecurity, a reclusive genius named Elias Thorne. Elias, he said, his voice level and dangerously calm. I have a priority 1 project for you. I need you to find someone, and I need you to find everything. Now. As he drove away, leaving the chaos of his abandoned car behind him, David realized something that chilled him to the bone. Kesha hadn't just hidden his children, she was protecting them, and whatever she was protecting them from was still a threat. A cold, calculating rage, the same rage that had fueled his rise to the top, took hold of him. Someone had played God with his life, had stolen 5 years from him and his sons, and David Chen was about to bring the full, crushing weight of his empire down upon them. The hunt was on. For the next 72 hours, David didn't sleep. His penthouse, usually a silent testament to his success, became a war room. The glass walls were covered in digital whiteboards, streaming with data. Elias Thorne, working remotely from a secure server farm, became his digital bloodhound. They started with the basics: birth records, Leo Samuel and Noah Chen, born 5 years ago. Father, unknown. The official document was a brick wall, but David hadn't built a tech empire by respecting walls. He had built it by finding backdoors. Elias unleashed a series of algorithms, crawlers that scoured the deep web, hunting for any digital breadcrumb Kesha might have left. They found her. She was working as an administrative assistant at a mid-level accounting firm, earning a salary that was barely above the poverty line for a family of 4. Her apartment was a 2-bedroom unit in a sprawling low-income complex in the suburbs, a place where dreams went to die. Her social media presence was a carefully curated ghost town. The few photos she posted were intentionally obscure. The boys were always in profile, or their faces were partially hidden by a cap, a shadow, a strategically placed toy. It was the work of someone deliberately trying to hide their identities. From facial recognition software, someone who knew they were being watched. And then Elias found the key that unlocked the entire conspiracy: a marriage certificate. Kesha was married. Her husband was Brandon Mitchell, a corporate lawyer at the prestigious family firm, Mitchell and Associates. David's world tilted again. He stared at the name on the screen: Brandon Mitchell. He didn't know the man, but a quick search revealed a world of privilege and power. Brandon's Instagram account was a shrine to manufactured perfection. There were photos of him and Kesha at black tie galas, on ski trips to Aspen, at beach resorts in the Caribbean, and in many of them, there were the boys, his boys, Leo, Sam, and Noah. Brandon presented them to the world as his own, his arm draped possessively around their small shoulders. The comments were a sickening stream of praise. What a beautiful family. You're such an amazing father, Brandon. Family goals. David felt a primal rage, a jealousy so fierce it was suffocating. This man, this stranger, was living his life. He was getting the credit for his sons, building a public persona as a devoted family man, on the foundation of a monstrous lie. The investigation intensified. David unleashed the full force of his resources, hiring a team of the best private investigators in the country, a discreet group of ex-Mossad and CIA agents who specialized in corporate espionage. He wanted to know everything about Brandon Mitchell and his family. The reports came in fast, each one a new layer of betrayal. The Mitchell family was legal royalty in the city, a dynasty of powerful lawyers with deep political connections that reached the highest levels of the state government. Brandon's father, Robert Mitchell Sr., was a kingmaker, a man who pulled strings from the shadows. The timeline became sickeningly clear. Brandon had met Kesha when she was 5 months pregnant and terrified. He had been a predator. Sensing her vulnerability, the investigators unearthed encrypted messages between Kesha and her sister, messages Kesha thought were private. In them, she confessed her fears. David was obsessed with his startup. They were broke. How could they possibly raise 3 children? Brandon had swooped in like a vulture, convincing her that David, with his unstable past and his all-consuming ambition, would be a terrible father. He offered her a deal with the devil, financial stability and security in exchange for her silence, in exchange for his sons. The betrayal was deeper than he could have imagined. Brandon hadn't just stumbled into the situation. He had orchestrated it. The investigators found emails Brandon had sent to a college friend, bragging about how he had rescued a beautiful, distressed woman from an irresponsible tech bro who knocked her up and was about to abandon her. He had invented a narrative where David was the villain and he was the white knight. He had used David's poverty and struggle, the very things David had fought so hard to overcome, as weapons against him. The final, soul-crushing blow came on Friday night. The lead investigator, a grim-faced man named Kobe, delivered a file that made David physically ill. Brandon hadn't just profited socially from the lie. He had profited professionally. He had used the story of adopting his wife's abandoned children to secure a promotion at his father's firm and a coveted seat on the board of a major charitable foundation for disadvantaged families. There were newspaper articles, video interviews, transcripts of speeches. In each one, Brandon Mitchell, with tears in his eyes, told the moving story of how he had stepped up to be a father to 3 boys who had been forsaken by their biological dad. He was lauded as a hero, a pillar of the community, an example of modern manhood. The hypocrisy was a physical poison. While David was fighting to build a future, Brandon was stealing his past and monetizing it. But it was a final, buried document that turned David's cold rage into something truly terrifying. Brandon had not only known who David was from the very beginning, he had actively planned for the day David might reappear. The investigators found a detailed legal strategy memo on Brandon's work server, a step-by-step plan for what to do if the biological father ever showed up. It included instructions on how to paint David as an unstable, opportunistic man trying to kidnap children who weren't legally his. It included plans to get a restraining order, to leak false stories to the press, to use the full weight of the Mitchell family's legal power to crush him. Brandon hadn't just hidden his children, he had built a fortress of lies around them and laid a minefield for David to walk through. Sitting in his silent penthouse, the city lights ablur through his unshed tears of fury, David Chen came to a decision. A direct assault was what Brandon expected. It was the trap he had laid. David would not walk into it. He would not be the irrational, emotional man Brandon had painted him to be. He would become a ghost again, a predator in the digital shadows. Brandon Mitchell had built his life and career on a carefully constructed narrative. David was going to deconstruct it, piece by piece, lie by lie, until there was nothing left but the ugly, rotten truth. He picked up the phone and made another call, this time to a woman whose name was a weapon in the world of family law. A lawyer, known for her scorched earth tactics against powerful, manipulative men. Rebecca, he said, his voice as cold and clear as glass. My name is David Chen. I have a case for you, and I want to burn someone's world to the ground. Brandon Mitchell thought he was a player in a game of power. He was about to discover that he was just a pawn in a game he couldn't even comprehend. A game whose rules were being rewritten by a man who had nothing left to lose and all the power in the world to fight back. The war had begun. Rebecca Santos was not the kind of lawyer who had corner offices with sweeping city views. Her office was in a modest, unassuming building in a neighborhood that power had long since forgotten. But the most powerful men in the city knew her name, and they feared it. She was a shark in a world of guppies, a woman who had built her reputation on dismantling the lives of abusive, manipulative men who used their wealth and influence as weapons. She was short, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, and a nonsense demeanor that could wither a hostile witness at 20 paces. David sat opposite her, a thick, meticulously organized binder on the table between them. He had spent the entire weekend compiling the evidence, every email, every social media post, every financial record. He laid out the story with the cold, dispassionate precision of a programmer detailing a system failure. Rebecca listened without interruption, her fingers steepled, her eyes fixed on his. When he was finished, she was silent for a full minute. Then she opened the binder. She spent another 30 minutes reading, her expression unreadable. Finally, she closed it with a soft, definitive thud. This is even worse than you think. Mr. Chen, she said, her voice calm but laced with steel. Brandon Mitchell didn't just steal your children, he built a prison around their mother. A prison of psychological coercion and financial dependence, designed to keep her under his absolute control. She turned her laptop towards him. On the screen were Kesha's financial records, which Rebecca's own team of forensic accountants had already pulled. Look at this, she said, pointing to a series of transactions. Kesha has no bank account in her own name, no credit cards. Her meager salary is deposited directly into a joint account to which Brandon has sole administrative access. He gives her a weekly allowance in cash, enough for groceries and bus fare, but never enough for her to save, to build a life, to escape. David felt a fresh wave of sickness. He had seen Kesha counting coins. He had assumed it was poverty. It wasn't. It was control. He documented everything, Rebecca continued, her voice hardening. We found emails between him and his paralegal, discussing the best way to manage Kesha's finances to ensure her stability and compliance. He treated her not as a wife, but as a high-risk asset. It was a cage, not of gold, but of 1,000 tiny demeaning transactions, each one reinforcing her powerlessness. But the true depths of Brandon's depravity were yet to be plumbed. There's more, Rebecca said, her expression grim. She brought up another file. It was a series of life insurance policies, 3 of them, one for each of his sons. Brandon Mitchell took out a life insurance policy for $500,000 on each of your children, naming himself as the sole beneficiary. The air in the room grew cold. $1.5 million, David said, his voice barely a whisper. For 3 perfectly healthy 50-year-olds, that's not an insurance policy, that's an investment. Legally, he has no right to insure children who are not his, Rebecca explained. He forged documents, claiming he was in the final stages of a formal adoption, but the amount, the timing, this is deeply disturbing. It suggests he was planning for a future where the children were no longer a factor, but their value could be liquidated. The implication was monstrous, a dark abyss of possibility that David couldn't bear to contemplate. Had Brandon's plan all along been to eventually dispose of the only evidence that could link him to the lie? He was building a case to have you declared an unfit father, Rebecca added, pulling up another set of documents. It was Brandon's search history, legal consultations. He had been researching how to prove emotional instability in a former partner, how to document erratic behavior, how to use a history of poverty as evidence of an unstable character. His plan wasn't just to keep you away, it was to erase you. If you ever showed up, he was prepared to paint you as a dangerous lunatic, and use his family's legal machine to have your parental rights permanently terminated. The insurance policies, they may have been his endgame. David stared at the evidence, a mosaic of pure, calculated evil. He felt a rage so profound, so absolute, that it transcended emotion and became a state of being. It was the cold, clear focus of a predator. We need to act fast, Rebecca said, her voice pulling him back from the edge. But we also need to be smart. If he gets a whiff that we know what he's planning, he could accelerate everything. He could take the boys and disappear. He won't, David said, his voice quiet but certain. He's too arrogant. He's a peacock. His power comes from the persona he's built. He needs his audience. And in that moment, the plan crystallized in David's mind. It was a plan worthy of the architect of ruin he was about to become. He would not confront Brandon in a courtroom. He would destroy him in the court of public opinion, the very arena Brandon had chosen for his stage. I'm not going to sue him, Rebecca, not yet. I'm going to become his biggest fan. The Trojan horse strategy was born. Over the next month, David Chen, the reclusive tech billionaire, began a surprising new chapter as a philanthropist. His first move was a $100,000 donation to the Foundation for Needy Families, the very charity where Brandon Mitchell sat on the board, polishing his halo of false benevolence. The donation, made anonymously through a shell corporation, earned David an invitation to the Foundation's exclusive inner circle and, more importantly, a seat at their upcoming annual fundraising gala. It was the perfect vantage point from which to observe his enemy. He learned Brandon's habits, his weaknesses. He saw the way Brandon preened under the adulation of the city's elite. He watched him tell the fabricated story of his adoptive family, his voice thick with fake emotion, to standing ovations. With every speech, every interview, every self-congratulatory post, Brandon was unknowingly handing David another weapon. David's team documented everything, using long-range microphones and hidden cameras, compiling a devastating dossier of hypocrisy. But the masterstroke was yet to come. David used his company's resources, the most advanced AI and data analysis tools on the planet, to create a complete digital ghost of Brandon's life of lies. It was a symphony of deception, meticulously orchestrated. Encrypted emails, damning financial records, the life insurance policies, the legal memos planning David's demise, audio recordings of Brandon bragging to friends, and at the center of it all, a certified DNA analysis report, proving with 99.999% certainty that David Chen was the biological father of Leo, Samuel, and Noah. This digital dossier was loaded onto a secure encrypted server, primed for simultaneous release to 3 key targets: the State Bar Association, that had given Brandon his Professional of the Year award, the entire board of directors and major donors of the foundation, and most devastatingly, to Marcus Reed, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist known for his ruthless take of corrupt public figures. The delivery was timed to the millisecond, set to trigger at the precise moment Brandon Mitchell took the stage at the Foundation's gala to deliver the keynote address. The night of the gala was a spectacle of self-congratulation. The city's legal and financial elite were packed into a grand ballroom, the air thick with the scent of money and power. Brandon Mitchell, immaculate in a custom-tailored tuxedo, was the man of the hour. He moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of a man who believed his own lies. David sat at a table in the back, a ghost in a tuxedo. Watching, he felt no nervousness, only the serene calm of a general watching his battle plan unfold. And now, the presenter boomed, a man whose life is a testament to family values and selfless dedication. Please welcome to the stage our keynote speaker and esteemed board member, Brandon Mitchell. Brandon walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. He beamed, soaking in the adoration. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and began. "I want to talk to you tonight about honesty," he started, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. "About the integrity it takes to build a family, to protect it." And then it happened. A subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. A single phone lit up, then another, and another. A low murmur rippled through the crowd as a wave of notifications washed over the audience. A digital plague delivered with surgical precision. David watched as the faces of the city's most powerful people changed from adoration to confusion, then to shock and disgust. Brandon, blinded by the stage lights, didn't notice at first. He continued his speech, his voice faltering slightly as the murmur grew into a buzz. It was then that Marcus Reed, the investigative journalist, stood up from his table near the front. "Mr. Mitchell," he called out, his voice cutting through the noise like a razor. "A question for you. Is it true that you have systematically impersonated the father of 3 children, whose real biological father you deliberately and maliciously kept away through a campaign of psychological and financial manipulation?" Silence. A profound, deafening silence fell over the ballroom. Every eye was on Brandon, who stood frozen on the stage, his face a mask of horror. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was a king standing naked in front of his court. "According to a dossier of evidence we have all just received," Reed continued, holding up his phone, "you have not only built your public reputation on this lie, but you have profited from it financially, professionally, and have even taken out fraudulent life insurance policies on the very children you claim to love. Do you have a comment, Mr. Mitchell?" Brandon Mitchell crumbled. It was not a slow decline, it was a public execution. He stared out at the sea of faces, at the hundreds of phones now pointed at him, recording his humiliation. He saw not admiration, but contempt. He stumbled backwards, knocking over the podium, and fled the stage, his empire of lies crashing down around him in a spectacular, irrevocable implosion. David stood up and walked out of the ballroom before anyone could connect him to the perfectly executed demolition. He felt no joy, no pleasure, only the cold, clean satisfaction of a complex equation finally being solved. 2 hours later, he stood at the door of Kesha's apartment. She opened it, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, but for the first time in 5 years, they were free of fear. "Brandon called," she whispered. He was screaming. "He's lost everything, his job, his reputation. The bar is opening an ethics investigation. His father disowned him. And how do you feel?" David asked, his voice gentle. A slow, watery smile touched her lips. Relieved, she breathed. "For the first time in 5 years, I feel free." The 3 boys appeared in the doorway behind her, their identical faces looking up at David, not with fear, but with a dawning, hesitant curiosity. "Mum said." "You're our real dad," said Leo, the bold one. David's carefully constructed composure finally broke. A wave of emotion so powerful it buckled his knees washed over him. He knelt down, bringing himself to their level, his own green eyes looking into three identical pairs. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I am, and if you'll have me, I would very much like to be a part of your lives from now on." The next day, the headlines were brutal. Hero to fraud. The spectacular fall of Brandon Mitchell. His firm issued a statement announcing his immediate termination. The foundation publicly rescinded his board seat. His wife, the one he paraded at galas, filed for divorce, citing moral turpitude. David, meanwhile, was in Rebecca Santos's office. "The paperwork is ready," she said, sliding a document across the table. "Kesha has voluntarily agreed to transfer full joint custody. There will be no fight. Legally, you are now recognized as their father." The weekend was a revelation. David didn't check his email. He didn't take a single call. He spent Saturday at the zoo with his sons. He watched their faces light up with wonder at the sight of a giraffe. He bought them ice cream and wiped their sticky faces. He pushed them on the swings. He learned that Leo was the leader, Sam was the sensitive artist, and Noah was the quiet observer. He was discovering a universe more complex and beautiful than any algorithm he had ever designed. That night, after tucking them into bed in the new bedrooms he had hastily set up in his penthouse, he and Kesha talked for hours. She told him of the loneliness, the fear, the suffocating control. He told her of the hollow ache of his success, the ghost of her that had haunted his every achievement. It was not an absolution, but it was a beginning. In the months that followed, David completely re-engineered his life. He stepped back from the day-to-day operations of his company, promoting his second-in-command to CEO. He bought a large, comfortable house in a family-friendly neighborhood, with a big backyard and a tire swing. He learned to make pancakes. He attended parent-teacher conferences. He discovered that the joy of teaching his son to ride a bike was 100 times more profound than closing a $100 million deal. His story, ironically, became a media sensation, but in a different way. He was no longer just the tech von. He was the father who had fought a corrupt system to reclaim his family. His journey inspired a national conversation about parental alienation and manipulation. Rebecca Santos became a legal star, using his case to change laws and help countless other families. One evening, about a year later, as he was reading a bedtime story to his sons, Noah, the quiet one, looked up at him. "Dad," he asked, "what happened to Brandon?" David thought for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "He learned a very hard lesson, buddy. He learned that you can't build a life on lies, because eventually, the truth will come and knock it all down." Brandon Mitchell, he had heard, was working as a paralegal in a small town 2 states away, a ghost of the man he once pretended to be. David felt nothing for him, no pity, no anger, only irrelevance. As he watched his 3 sons drift off to sleep, their chests rising and falling in the soft glow of the nightlight, David understood the true nature of his victory. The best revenge wasn't the spectacular destruction of his enemy, it was the quiet, patient construction of a life filled with love, laughter, and scraped knees. Brandon had tried to steal 5 years of his fatherhood, but in doing so, he had inadvertently given David the greatest gift of all, the chance to become the father he was always meant to be. The real empire wasn't built of code and capital. It was built of these small, precious, irreplaceable moments. And it was an empire that no one could ever take away from him again.